Today we're diving into the legal fallout of protests that have rocked LA following aggressive ICE raids and the deployment of National Guard troops. Joining us today is civil rights attorney James DeSimone, who is currently representing three people who have been severely injured during the protests. From a civil rights perspective, how concerning is it that protests against immigration raids led to a military style response from the US government?
Well, I think it's very concerning. The people who are being rounded up, put in vans. I mean, they're our neighbors, they're members of our community. So the reaction of Los Angelinos to go out into the streets and exercise their First Amendment rights to protest this and to say, we do not want armed armed federal forces in our neighborhoods with these armored cars coming in with a show of force into workplaces, into schools, arresting grammar school children, people who are showing up to court, going through the legal mechanism of being admitted legally into the United States and staying here. They're getting rounded up. Workplaces are, our economy is going to suffer, and the effects on the family. So, the protests were an organic response to the wrongdoing. And so I'm very concerned that the Marines are coming today. The National Guard is here. There's really no provisions for them. You can see the National Guard has no place to sleep. They're not being provided sufficient food. I mean, none of this was planned for. It's just this show of force. But what is also disturbing, frankly, is our own local police departments. There's very much a disconnect between what Mayor Karen Bass is saying and some of the city council people are saying about the response to these protests, and then what is happening out in the street. And I've already been retained by three individuals who are injured by less lethal munitions. One shot by the Los Angeles Police Department and two shot by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And so, I'd like to speak on that because these are life-altering injuries.
Yeah, if you
Uh,
could talk to us about those cases, what were they doing? How did that happen to them?
Yeah, well, each case is in individ is a little different. But the gentleman I spoke to yesterday, he was he basically stood up. He was behind a barricade where he said no one was in that particular situation. No one was throwing anything at the police officers. The police officers were some distance away. And he was trying to document what was happening. He stood up to take a photograph, and a less lethal munition, most likely a 40 millimeter, which is actually a beanbag that's full of metal. It's like a mesh, but there are metal beads inside. It's a firearm. It hit him in the face. He has facial fractures, broken nose in two places, a deep laceration inside of his mouth. Another case where person is protesting peacefully, gets hit in the head. He has a brain bleed. His brain was bleeding from this. They're trained that they're not supposed to shoot in the head, but the reckless manner in which they are shooting these less lethal weapons at the crowd is basically causing these injuries. In the third instance, an explosive device was thrown too close to my client, and it actually embedded in his leg so that he has this about a 2-inch explosive device that had to be surgically removed from his leg. And that's the third client. This is day one. That was Monday. We'll see what happens on Tuesday. Um, so,
Horrible.
yeah, it's deeply disturbing. It's it violates policy. It violates the United States Constitution. Those weapons, the 40 millimeters, are only supposed to be used on a target specific if someone in the crowd is posing an imminent threat of harm to the officers or to other people. They cannot be used for crowd control. What I saw on video, I haven't been down there. But what I saw on video is just this indiscriminate use where they're marching towards a crowd and just shooting into the crowd.
Well, they even
And
shot a journalist and it was all recorded on camera, and you could see one of the uniformed man directly pointing at the journalist, and he hit her leg
yeah,
when she was live. So
right, right.
I'm guessing it's pretty similar to what happened to the last client you mentioned.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I saw that video, and I mean, not to make light of it, but you said I'm all right. Now, there are certain types of well, that was just again, you could tell by the video she was targeted. She's on the air. She's talking. This guy took a shot at her, and he there it was it seemed to
She
hit
was
her in the foot. She the first thing she said was I'm okay. She may not feel that way after a little while. She's probably going to be in a lot of pain. These are very painful, even if they just hit you in the leg. But yeah, there is absolutely no reason for that. And the city of Los Angeles is complains about its liability costs for excessive force cases and other types of lawsuits. A lot of them are trip and falls, but I did represent numerous people out of the 2020 George Floyd protests who were unnecessarily injured by the deployment of this type of weaponry on people who are in crowds.
How would you compare the response to those George Floyd protests to what is happening right now in LA?
I think it's very similar. I think they haven't learned their lesson. What you ended up having after George Floyd is you had these very detailed reports detailing the excessive force that was used against protesters. But what you didn't have was accountability. You didn't have anyone who was getting disciplined, either in the command structure or the individual officers who used that force. So what happens is you have a command that comes down. It came from the chief of police and says, less lethal is authorized. I'm authorizing my officers to use less lethal, but they still have to follow the rules. They still can't, I mean, not only is it against their policies, the LAPD training policies and directives as to when you could use this. I mean, you could only use that weaponry when someone is, combative, they're fighting with an officer, something like that, or they're threatening someone, they're armed with weapons. They're shooting these at people who are don't have weapons, are part of the peaceful protest, and we intend to hold them accountable, but as civil lawyers, our way of holding them accountable is by our civil justice system, which is monetary compensation for the people who are injured.
What legal mechanisms exist to protect them?
Well, the damage is done. I mean, we can, we will be filing civil rights lawsuits on their behalf, most likely in state court. I've traditionally we did a lot of this work in federal court, but the federal judiciary is is increasingly hostile with qualified immunity. They can utilize qualified immunity is a bit of a crapshoot, so to speak. It depends on what judge, what panel, as to whether or not, and what qualified immunity does is just deprives us of our day in court. It means a judge in a back room could say, you lose as a matter of law, you lose your right to a jury trial. So, I mean, not only is the Fourth Amendment of unreasonable search and seizure violated when this force is used, because that's an unreasonable seizure when force is used against someone. But we in the United States have a Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial, and qualified immunity is used to deprive individuals of that Seventh Amendment right. It's not in the Constitution. There's nothing about qualified immunity in the Constitution. It's a judicially created mechanism to protect the police, and it's misguided because the police never pay for this anyway. It's always the municipalities. It's always our tax dollars that pay for it. Police seem to get promoted when they use excessive force in our police department. Um, but we'll file civil lawsuits in Los Angeles Superior Court and hope to get justice for those individuals. But I really call upon our leaders, such as Karen Bass and the City Council, who are concerned about the federal presence, to take care of their own backyard. I'm a firm believer in the right to peacefully protest, and as I in my outreach social media that I put out here as a civil rights lawyer, I'm always emphasizing to people, don't give them an excuse to act violently. We should not be, people should not be throwing concrete at police cars and throwing rocks. It doesn't, you're not going to win. I mean, they have superior firepower. But you're also, you're not only risking your own self, but you end up risking everyone else who's in the crowd, who's peacefully protesting. It's someone who's there for all the right reasons and is following our tradition and our constitutional rights of exercising their First Amendment rights and to peaceably assemble. Gets an injury. I mean, if you have a brain bleed, that's a traumatic brain injury that's going to affect our client for the rest of his life. And once that's done, there's no taking it back. So I think everybody bears a responsibility, but I really would hope that the lessons that should have been learned weren't learned in our city from the previous protests, and people are going to get hurt because of that.
And James is deploying the National Guard troops to manage civil unrest over immigration enforcement legal. What are the limits?
Well, we're going to see, right? Governor Newsom has filed a lawsuit and has basically invoked the 10th Amendment of states' rights that without the state and asking for the National Guard to intervene, that it's unconstitutional. So it's really not clear if the president has exceeded his authority in ordering the National Guard. The bigger question here is it's just unnecessary. It's a performative show of force. And it's, to call what's going on an insurrection or saying that LA is rioting. There are individuals within crowds who have acted unlawfully, and there should be consequences for that. But you look at the protests, not the protests, you look at the celebrations after the Dodgers won the World Series. They don't look a lot different. You have some vehicles on fire. It's horrible. I mean, I don't think anybody should be setting any vehicles on fire, even Waymos that don't have any drivers in them. They were setting the Waymos on fire. So, thankfully, no one's threatened in that situation, presumably, but still, I mean, anything can happen. But we have California Highway Patrol, Los Angeles County Sheriffs, Los Angeles Police Department, who are incredibly well armed and are able to control these without the National Guard or the Marines, who are trained in death and destruction to come into the situation. 1992 was different. That was the last time the National Guard was used, and I was a young lawyer then in 1992, and remember very well the Rodney King. You might call that an insurrection. I mean, I did go downtown then. I did see a lot police cars set on fire. Situation. It was a widespread, destructive protest. Over 60 people were killed. People were getting attacked and killed. Reginald Denny. Nothing like that is happening in Los Angeles right now. We don't need the National Guard. We don't need the Marines. We don't need ICE to come in and mass arrest people and destroy our communities. It's heartbreaking to
This
see these families being, torn apart and children being left without parents. It's just, I mean, my family's crying about it. I have adult children crying because they know what's happening and can't believe that it's happening in our midst.
Yeah. A lot of people have been comparing Trump's response to what an authoritarian government would do.
People were getting attacked and killed. Reginald Denny. Nothing like that is happening in Los Angeles right now. We don't need the National Guard. We don't need the Marines. We don't need ICE to come in and mass arrest people and destroy our communities. It's heartbreaking to
This
see these families being, torn apart and children being left without parents. It's just, I mean, my family's crying about it. I have adult children crying because they know what's happening and can't believe that it's happening in our midst.
Yeah. A lot of people have been comparing Trump's response to what an authoritarian government would do. With your civil rights perspective, would it be comparable?
I think it's absolutely a show of authoritarian force. I mean, he is threatening to arrest the governor of our state. He's threatening to, you have a labor leader, David Huerta, who is standing there being arrested. Look at what's happening in New York. They are denying members of Congress to congressional oversight to go into these facilities to check on the well-being of these individuals. The individuals who are being detained in inhumane situations where they're not getting adequate food, adequate water. There's no due process. They can't call their lawyers. They can't call their family. They're shoved into a small space, 40 people with just a tinfoil blanket to sleep on concrete. You're damn right it's authoritarian. It's horrific what is being done in the name of the United States of America. And without due process, how many of those individuals are actually here legally and are citizens or have a green card and but have no way of contesting that because of the manner in which these arrests are being made. So um, I think he singled out California right now. He has bragged before. I attacked California. He's making good on that promise. He is, in a sense, this is an attack on our state. It shows, unfortunately, the limitations of our democracy because of the Electoral College, and he doesn't give a damn about California because he perceives he lost here and could never win in California.
Going back to what is currently happening, LA ICE raids, um, how should people, especially immigrants, um, in affected neighborhoods, document or respond if they feel their rights have been violated during these crackdowns? What
Yeah.
would be, the best bet for them?
Well, it's not an easy situation, but I think, the right to, you have a right to remain silent, and you should just keep it. Everyone should have a connection with a lawyer who does this type of work. It's not really me because I'm not an immigration lawyer in that situation. Um, but to keep asking to call a lawyer, I want to call my lawyer, I want to call my lawyer and have a number to call. Um, yes, in schools and so on, they do not have to open doors. They can keep folks out, but um, what's happening is these federal officers, don't have any respect for the Constitution and are going in and just, using when they can, just going in and arresting people. So it's frustrating because I don't know that there's a good answer. Unfortunately, because of who our president is and the policies that are being forced, that a lot of families are going to suffer.
And talking about the future, you've compared these demonstrations and the response of the government to George Floyd. When that happened, protests started spurring around different cities in the United States, nationwide. Do you see as ICE raids continue in different places, LA might inspire a similar type of response in other places? And if so, do you think the federal government has enough resources to respond to all of these in the manner it has done in LA.
I mean, this Saturday there's planned nationwide demonstrations throughout the United States of America to protest the policies of this administration in many respects. Do they have the capacity to go everywhere? I think they'll target where they perceive that they can inflict the most harm. But the one disturbing thing about this, is that the amount of money that's just being approved to hire new federal agents and, background checks. I mean, it's been, pretty suspected and established that, they're hiring, Proud Boy members, people who were part of the January 6th attempt to overthrow our democratically elected processes, which was a true insurrection. I mean, they went and attacked the Capitol building to stop an election from taking place. That's an insurrection. That's where the National Guard should have been called while Trump sat on his, phone, tweeting nonsense. But in this instance, will the United States government be at war with its cities throughout the United States of America? Um, you know, we're starting to see the start of that, and I'm fearful that it's only going to get worse and escalate. If you want to commit civil disobedience, do so peacefully, but don't destroy property. Don't attack police officers. I don't think police officers are being directly attacked, but I saw some rock throwing, at cars, and it only unfortunately and vehicles being burned. It only unfortunately plays into a narrative that this is everyone, but the vast majority of people who are involved in these protests are principled people who are speaking out because what they see they feel is wrong, and those types of protests should be respected. The police should be protecting their right to protest, not attacking
Would
them.
you recommend undocumented people to go out and protest right now?
Hell no. Sorry, but no way, I don't think it's smart because there you're subjecting yourself to being arrested. And so, um, I think unfortunately undocumented people have to be very careful about where they go and what they do, um, until hopefully there's some change in our approach to allow individuals who are seeking to be properly documented to achieve that and not end up, on the floor of some jail cell with a tinfoil blanket.
James, time is running out. Thank you so much for discussing this very important topic with us and taking time out of your day to do so. I hope your clients get better. Definitely keep us updated about their status.